On the video feed, Brandon Sutton, host of The Discourse, or co-host. Is that right, Brandon?
I mean, I don't know what the difference between being the host and the co-host is. I lead the show with my three other, pundits, thought partners, whatever you want to call it, Richard, Adair, and John. So yeah, I'm the co-host. I'm ready to take a back seat in my own show. I'm ready to basically just cash a check. I don't even need to show up.
Yeah, no, that's the dream, right? That's living the dream.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, will you just do me a favor? Put your microphone just a little bit closer. We're getting a little bit of your room tone.
I'm sorry about that.
Oh, that's great.
I'll hold it like this.
Yeah, that's great. So, Brandon, 24 hours ago, maybe 12 hours ago, I thought, okay, well, we're going to talk about Amy Coney Barrett, and there's been some movement on her, and we'll get into this a little bit. But this ad emerged that she signed years ago, but basically very explicitly calling for the repeal of Roe v. Wade. And that is a question that you are asked when you go in front of the Judiciary Committee, when you write out your the questionnaire. Have you ever signed anything that directly implicates a potential case that you may be hearing in the future? And she declined to mention that she had signed that very public ad, maybe thinking it was 20 years ago. Maybe she forgot. But that seemed to put a little bit of scare in somebody within the Republican caucus, because Mitch McConnell sort of backed off his idea of having the hearings pre-election. We will return to that, because these are all the things that are going to be implicated. We have the race as it is, polls around the country. We have Melania Trump being investigated, or not her necessarily, but the financing around the inauguration being investigated, which in part led to the release of a tape that shows that she really doesn't like the idea of doing Christmas decorations, which I know it's shocking. It is shocking.
It's so good, though.
We have almost a half a dozen Republican senators who must be really afraid of losing their seats over the issue of healthcare, because they have reversed essentially their previous positions by supporting Democrats in an attempt to stop the DOJ from destroying the ACA in a lawsuit. We have the passage of another stimulus bill, as reports of the economy are, flagging from even its like sort of anemic recovery that was happening. And then we have, of course, the daily dispatch of Republicans attempting to keep people from voting, all of which is overshadowed by the fact that the president has the coronavirus, as does the First Lady, as does Senator Mike Lee. And we don't know who else at this point. I mean, I imagine there's a lot of people in our government who are getting tested right now.
I mean, look, I just think back to the debate. I think back to that one moment at the debate where he literally reaches into his sort of suit jacket pocket and he goes, I love masks. I wear masks everywhere. But, today everyone's been tested. It's fine. We're following social distance guidelines. And I'm just like, yeah. Are you? I mean, I think ultimately we're going to see, we know that a lot of first of all, we know that the coronavirus, a lot of the initial ideas surrounding who were spreading it were these ultra rich people who are, traveling for conventions, traveling for vacations, traveling around, for any number of reasons. Right. And I think that the level of access to rapid response testing that, some people enjoy, it insulates them from the worst effects of coronavirus for sure. But there is still that grace period of 4 or 5 days where, people are contagious and they'll test negative. Right. So I think we're seeing a lot of that kind of come into play here, where it's like, this is not the kind of thing you can just entirely insulate yourself from simply by having access to all the best things. You're going to have to actually sort of wait it out. Right. At least to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a really fascinating point, because I think that at the beginning of this, and I'm talking like in early March, late February, where it starts to spread in this country, it is a function of people who have traveled either for conferences or whatnot, or coming from Europe and coming back and forth. And then, of course, the brunt of it is bared by people who are low income and are expected to work through this and need to work through this and don't have their own cars or using public transport or are living in denser areas or have less access to high quality medical care. And then and then we move into sort of the era where it's just sort of like more like, as we get to more rural areas into the Midwest, it's really more of a function of like just people just not believing that it's real. And then you have people who are, like you say, the elite who are using these rapid tested regimes and assume that they're safe and then turn out not to be. Look, here's the thing. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a public health policy expert who, if they were being totally honest, wouldn't say, regardless of what happens to the president, this is a positive for the country because maybe people will take it more seriously now. Right? Like, I mean, the idea that the president, who was probably the chief proponent of the idea that you are fine, you don't have to worry too much about this, as long as you're not really old or you're not, have some type of comorbidity or something like that, has been telling people that. And now, and people think like, I can't get it, it's overblown, whatnot. And now he's got it. And it may have the opportunity to re-educate people to some extent.
Well, maybe, or he might just be another Bolsonaro who has had COVID-19, 17 times right now by this point and has not died. And the danger of that, I think, is that, when you're talking about somebody who's prone to reactionary thinking, kind of like Trump is, if he gets COVID and he's fine, just for maybe he's asymptomatic, maybe he is just like a freak of nature who just doesn't have any, like he has it and it's like a small, flu, small cold, he gets the sniffles. He seems kind of like a baby, so he's going to be very like about it no matter what, that is going to influence how he thinks about it. It just might reaffirm their beliefs, right? That, okay, well, you know what? Trump got it. He was fine. He's 70 plus years old. Then I'll be fine too, right? Of course, that also erases just like the chances of just like being fine randomly or just the access to the level of healthcare he has. So, yep. I think there's a danger on both sides, right? If this is the, teachable moment that lets Trump take it seriously, great, I suppose, but I doubt that's going to be the case. Or just another point to, more broadly, I think when it comes to the rapid testing scenario too, more broadly speaking, you're talking about like COVID generally, people thinking the solution lies in just like a technological response. Like the only way we're going to solve COVID, rapid testing and like a vaccine. That's the solution to COVID. And of course, that's part of the solution. Obviously, that's like the, end goal. But a lot of this is just behavioral changes. It's social changes. It's like having to reorient society in a way that people don't necessarily like to hear about because it sounds difficult and it might be costly and, whatever. So the idea that there's just going to one day be a magical vaccine that is 100% effective is just like the only thing that might be, it's like it's the goal in people's minds when a lot of this is just always going to be like changing your behavior.
It's interesting. I wonder, it'll be fascinating to see, in New York, we're seeing numbers tick up and over the past couple of weeks, largely as a function of the Hasidic community. There's no way to contain it in any area. Every area has, it seems to me, part of the country has like their, sort of their problem areas in terms of developing. In South Dakota, it was motorcycle rally. In New York, it's like the Hasidic community. And then obviously it spreads outward from there because it's hard. Nobody is really completely walled off in any fashion. I wonder, and one of the things that epidemiologists have said to me on this program is that, peak to peak, 6 months. And the second peak is generally bigger than the first. Now in New York, that would mean October. It would mean around now. And it's starting to creep a little bit up, but who knows? I wonder if an event like this, where the president gets it, and like you say, we don't know how, 40% of the people who get it, they may not even know it that they have it. The president apparently, though, was showing some symptoms, mild symptoms, but it's early on. You don't know where it can go. We will know in the next 5 or 6 days as to like how bad it gets. But I wonder if it's going to like even maybe possibly prevent a second spike in some areas, because I'm not convinced that part of the reason why you get a second spike is not necessarily a change in the virus, but rather a change in, like you say, the behavior that people adopt. Because we've been outside for the past 6 months, at least, or not 6 months, past 2 or 3 months in the Northeast, 4 or 5 months, I guess. And people get used to like, it's very hard to transmit it outside, and people are wearing masks. But at one point it's like, wait, we got to go inside because it's getting too cold. And inside is very, very tricky. And it's very easy to just take the mask off and think like, oh, we're fine, like the Trump folks, and then find that, no, you're not fine. And I wonder if this in some ways will sort of like remind people that anybody can get it at any time.
I mean, I think that is one version of events, the optimistic view. I think also when you're talking about behavioral changes over time in this kind of situation, we have to look at the idea, the fact that, we're still struggling with getting, basic aid for most people from the government. Like we're still struggling for, getting rent relief. We're still struggling for getting unemployment insurance where, another round of stimulus checks would be great, but look how long we had to wait for those stimulus checks, right? So part of that equation is going to always be like, well, in many places, the government has just abandoned people. And, you can do, I guess I would say, what does it really mean to take COVID-19 seriously as an individual in the absence of like any kind of structural support? Right. Because I think that, we can pick out problematic communities all over the place. We can pick out, ones that are racially or religiously motivated. We can pick out ones that are just like college students. Like they're just going to go to party at college. Right. But like it's just not a reasonable or practical thing to do, I think, in epidemiology, even to try to control the behavior of individuals without some kind of structural incentive to behave that way, right? Because people have to go to work. You said, right? People have to go to work. People have to, people have to exercise. They have to buy groceries. They have to, and they have to commute too, right? Especially in New York City, where they have to drive the train. Most people do public transportation. So I think, part of the thing that we've been grappling with, I think, as a country, like, is the blame game part of this. Like, now that we've rather in the absence of structural support from the government, in the absence of a real ability to demand it from them, the only thing we feel like we can do, I think sometimes, is like point out who's not following the rules properly and try to self-police, right? But then you talk about, restaurant, in like in-person restaurant dining, it's like, but then basically we've just deputized customer like service employees to be the new like mask police, right? We've deputized people who make sub-minimum wage, like serving drinks to like drunk guys to like make sure that they're also like public health officials, right? So, I mean, at a certain point, we have to talk about like, as the COVID continues to ravage the country, and people still lack support, eventually they're just going to be inclined to do what they, just do what they do, right?
Right. No, it's a very good point. And I think to a certain extent, it's about sequencing, right? Like, Donald Trump has all the support in the world, like literally all the support in the world. And so you could hold him to a higher standard, or at least to maybe hold him to the same standard that you would other people. But the sequence has to be, you need a context in which it is not all incumbent upon you, that you are incentivized in some ways. I mean, I think they, what do they call that? Kludge or something like that. Not kludge, but, nudge. Or whatever it is. I mean, you need to provide a context where it makes it much easier for people to make a decision. I'm not going to work. And they're going to go to work if they don't have the ability to support themselves or to take care of themselves. They're not going to go to the hospital if they don't have health insurance, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a really good point. All right, let's just turn to there's so many different stories that are going on right now that there's two major ones, it seems to me. One is, I mean, obviously the election, and who knows? I mean, who knows? There may not be any more debates, right? I mean, Donald Trump, the protocol is he's quarantined for 14 days, but that presumes that he doesn't even have symptoms, right? I mean, if he has symptoms and he's sick, he needs to quarantine for even longer because he may be infectious for even longer. We don't know. And so and there are calls that Joe Biden shouldn't campaign is just absurd at this point.
When did he start?
Nobody,
Sorry.
what?
When did he start? Sorry.
Well, I mean, the irony is they were just announced that they're going to launch in-person campaigning. Bernie Sanders has announced like yesterday that they're going out to campaign in person. The Biden campaign is just now starting to send people out to canvass. I mean, that's the irony of this, is that you're right. When did he start? The plan was to start this week. And so who knows what's going to happen in that regard. There's the Amy Coney Barrett thing. And right now, Mike Lee has tested positive. He's got a quarantine for 14 days. They still have plenty of Republicans to sit on that committee to maintain a quorum in the Judiciary Committee. But that includes Graham, Tillis, and Ernst. These are senators who are in big trouble right now. And, Grassley, Cornyn's got to be in Texas, maybe. He doesn't seem to be too threatened there, but so he may be able to come back. But if I'm these guys, I'm a little hesitant to come back. Chuck Grassley, these are older gentlemen. Ted Cruz can be around. Ben Sass can be around. Josh Hawley might be able to, but Tillis needs to go back to North Carolina because he's in a very tight race. Ernst needs to be in Iowa because she's in a tight race. You've got Blackburn and Kennedy and I guess Crapo, and supposedly McConnell is pushing to have the hearings in 2 weeks. Give me your sense of how this is going to play out. I mean, do you think McConnell's going to try and? I mean, at this point, or let me ask you this, something more specific. Do you think the Democrats should show up at these hearings? Because I'm of two minds. One is this whole process is illegitimate. It doesn't matter who you nominate. You could have nominated Merrick Garland. This should not be happening now. Or now with this new stuff about Roe v. Wade being so explicit that it endangers maybe a couple of senators who are a little bit afraid to vote in this way. Maybe in places like, I don't know, in Arizona, maybe even in Iowa. What is your sense of this?
Well, I guess it really depends, in my sense, on like how hard the Democrats are willing to push Amy, right? How hard are they willing to actually, pin this on Trump's nominee for the Supreme Court? Because I think that in the absence of a few of these Republican senators, they should just turn into a referendum on Roe v. Wade. They should turn into a referendum on her history of lying. They should turn it on a referendum on basically the Republicans, right? However, I think that the choice of this particular candidate was not one that was made just haphazardly. It's made to, I think, basically box the Democrats into a little bit of a corner, right? We know that we have Ruth Bader Ginsburg unfortunately passed away. We have a vacancy. I'm nominating a woman judge who's been on the courts for decades. What's the problem, right?
Well, she's been on for 3 years, to be clear.
Sorry.
She was on for three years. She's in the I think it's Seventh Circuit. She was a law professor at Notre Dame for over a decade.
I'm sorry, got my dates mixed up there. But my larger point is not necessarily how long she's been in the courts, but that she's qualified, right? She is a qualified candidate in the most abstract sense of the word, and she sort of ticks these little symbolic, boxes that Democrats like, right? It's going to be hard for them, I think, in some situations, especially given the kind of way they discuss gender rights and women's rights and even racial rights, to, I think, pin her down on the Roe v. Wade thing and not have it come across as attacking a woman for her position on choice, right? Trying to make it more of an abstract thing versus just an abstract identity thing that's hard to pin on somebody who's, also within the realm of making choices for her own body, as opposed to keeping it in the realm of this is a political issue and you were lying, you were caught lying. How do you kind of how do you justify that? And also, how do you justify being so partisan on this court? Now, whether or not that can work and whether or not it's meaningful in preventing her nomination is debatable. But I think if they're going to have, if they choose to have these hearings, if they choose to show up, rather, they need to actually be willing to sort of make a legitimate, or rather break themselves out of this corner they put themselves in, where like if Trump just, if he nominates Diamond and Silk to the Supreme Court, they just can't do anything because they're like, this is representation. This is the kind of, inclusivity that we've talked about as being inherently radical and inherently sort of like progressive, like just the inclusion of more people with these like sort of these boxes ticked is enough. And getting too into the details is just, it's not fair, right? It's not fair to judge people based on their past. It's not fair to judge people based on personal opinions. So, I mean, they have, like they do pin themselves a little bit, but there's a way out of it, I'd imagine, if you're going to have to do it.
I mean, my concern is that Dianne Feinstein showed in Coney Barrett's hearing to the appellate court that she doesn't have the ability to nuance this argument in terms of Catholics. Coney Barrett had written in a law review article in the late 90s, basically saying that if you were a Catholic, like she is, who has a deep, abiding, really fundamentalist belief in Catholic teaching, that so that you would be fundamentally biased, and she was writing specifically about the death penalty, against the death penalty, then you should recuse yourself in those cases because of your attachment to the Catholic canon, as it were. And it just conveniently, she's pro-death penalty. So she's asking other Catholics to recuse themselves in that situation. She doesn't believe the same thing when it comes to abortion, but it's a harder argument for her to make now because there is unequivocal proof, literally a signed document that says Roe v. Wade should be overturned. Now, the game that these justices play is that, like, I'm not going to comment on a case that I may hear because it would be prejudicial. Well, that cat's out of the bag now. There's an ad, literally a full-page newspaper ad. Like it's almost like a joke. It's like, I'm not going to broadcast this to everybody. You did. It's there. And so I still don't know if Dianne Feinstein, I mean, certainly there are people who have deep, deep concerns that she is just not adept enough at this point in her career to deal with this. And I guess we'll see. But I think this is really more a political question for those Republicans who are in jeopardy of losing their seat. Can they afford to vote for to confirm a nominee who, at this point, like, it's one thing for you and I to say, like, of course she's going to vote against Roe v. Wade. It's another for a Republican woman in the suburbs, let's say, or frankly, anywhere else, to say, well, we don't know how she's going to vote, versus my opponent, Joni Ernst, my opponent, Tom Tillis, my opponent, Cory Gardner, my opponent, pick one in Arizona. They voted for a judge who has been explicit in overturning Roe v. Wade. When they cast this vote, it's as if they cast the vote to curb your ability to get an abortion. That's a much harder thing to do, I think. And that's why I think McConnell's been a little bit wavering. But now I wonder, with the president, and maybe with the president with having had COVID, and it sort of shaking up the dynamic here. And now I wonder if McConnell doesn't go full steam ahead. It is, we're just in such an unprecedented time. And there's so many moving pieces. It's so difficult at this point to get an assessment as to what's going to happen. And just, we got a couple minutes here. Same dynamic happening on some level. The president testing positive for COVID. I wonder how much it shakes up what's going on with the House. Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats passed a $3.2 trillion bill, the HEROES Act. This was back in over the summer, nearly 4 months ago now, I guess. And it was what they called at the time a messaging bill. Some of the message was, we are so desperate to not have, we are so desperate to not upset the insurance industry that we're going to promote the idea of subsidizing COBRA as a solution to people's health care. Other things in there that were better for folks. And Pelosi got a lot of pressure from some of those frontline Democrats. They passed a new bill, $2.2 trillion less this time, trying to get closer to maybe what Republicans will sign off on. In many ways, it's structured as the same bill, just with shorter timelines so that the money expended was less. And the Senate, I think, is talking about a bill that's about half that size, maybe a little bit more. Do you think that this creates more pressure, and particularly with the economic numbers? Do you think this creates more pressure on the Republicans, and particularly the White House, to pass something before then, or is it just, are we too close to the election and they're just like, we're going to let it ride because in the event that Joe Biden wins, we don't want to in any way to provide any relief for the American public?
Well, I mean, I think in terms of does it put pressure on the Republican Party, my answer is kind of the same with the, Amy Barrett situation, where it's just, situations can't put pressure on Republicans usually. It has to be the Democrats. It has to be the Democrats or some sort of mass political movement that's just uprising and causing, mass unrest to the point where it can't be ignored. So the question more becomes, can the Democrats use Trump being diagnosed with COVID and probably exposing, everyone else to it, to their advantage in a way that they normally can't seem to manage, right? I'm seeing a lot of Democrats who are just like, I pray for the FLOTUS and POTUS to get healthy and better and well. And it's like, that's fine and well and good. And we know they have to say that. You can't really say anything else. And that's fair, I guess. But like the fact that this should be a very easy way to pivot into like, yeah, but you know what? Trump may be fine, but other people don't have the same level of access to healthcare that he does. They don't have the same level of access, the same ability to quarantine for 14 days sometimes, the same, infinite resources to draw upon if they happen to be sick. I got COVID. I was sick for like 2 months and it was terrible, right? They don't have, but a lot of people don't have the ability or the savings. I know I didn't to, make it through that much time off of work, right? But luckily I can work from home or do other things. So, this can be a teachable moment for the country. This can be a teachable moment for, their voters, for Republicans, for anybody, but it kind of incumbent on Democrats to actually make it that and make a big deal out of it and use it as a cudgel as opposed to sort of just like falling back on, propriety, right? Falling back on like, well, you can't just be mean to Trump now because he has like coronavirus, but it's like, well, didn't he say it wasn't a big deal? wasn't it not a big deal last week? So, I mean, it comes down to like, maybe this is the time where we have to like, stand up and like, yeah, it's fine. Trump, he's going to be fine or not. That's up to him. But like other people are not within that position. But I think when you have a figure like Trump, you have a figure like any of our politicians or political media, it's easy for people to be, for them and their problems to be platformed and for people to demand empathy for them as like sort of a demand for empathy for the status quo. Right. So, I am more concerned not about like Trump, but like whether or not they can effectively weaponize Trump's illness, to be completely blunt, as a, way to say that, he was so wrong about COVID-19, he got it himself, and you can't say good for him, but like, Well,
I think that last point you made, Brandon, is right on target. The fact of the matter is that every day there are thousands upon thousands, with 40,000 people getting infected every day. And they don't have the resources that Donald Trump does. And we need to provide that to him. Brandon Sutton, folks can check out the discourse on any of your podcast services. Is that right?
Yeah, you absolutely can. You can find it on iTunes, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, found it on Patreon. I don't know if there are any other podcast platforms. No offense, a lot of podcasts come out and a lot of platforms come out, like the one per each podcast. True. I can't keep up with them myself. I'm not a big podcast person. But you can find the discourse on all your major podcast platforms. We have a new episode coming out today on Patreon for all of our lovely subscribers about the debate.
Check it out.
Exactly.
All right, thanks,
check it
Brandon.
Out. Thank you for having me.
All right, man.